I now recognize myself for the first line of questioning. Dr. Luthi, thank you for your service on the Women in Aviation Advisory Board. I find it incredibly frustrating that only 2.6% of aviation mechanics in the United States are women. And that representation of women as a percentage of the total number of aviation maintenance technicians has barely budged over the past decade. We just aren't making the kind of progress that we need. And it's even more discouraging that this is happening when we face such an acute need to grow the workforce. I know how critical it is to conduct outreach to young women while they're still in school to help broaden their horizons and hopefully inspire and prepare these young Americans for potentially high-paid careers in aviation mechanic work. The Aviation Workforce Development Grant Program provides funding for this type of outreach and education. Dr. Luthi, could you explain the return on investment that Congress could expect if it dramatically increased Aviation Workforce Development Grant Program funding to meet industry demand and help broaden outreach to more Americans, particularly young women?
Certainly. Absolutely, maintenance is definitely a clear area, as we talked about earlier, of talent crisis. So as mentioned, 3% of maintenance technicians are women. I will say there's a slight bit of good news on that front. So the most recent ATEC report that came out had the percentage of graduates from aviation maintenance technical schools at 9%. So
we've doubled.
Exactly. I mean, it's triple, but we're still in the single digits.
Yep.
And one of the things that came out of that report that was very disturbing to me also is that only 42% of the graduates from these schools are actually going on and doing the A&P certification. So although it's 9% graduates, that's not really going to convert to a big increase in women in maintenance numbers. So workforce development grants are something that we talk about in the board report and highly recommend expansion of workforce development grants as a tool to help us draw in and more workforce and a broader representation in workforce, in particular women, to the aviation industry. So those grants give us the ability to, as you mentioned, expand in education and awareness. We know this is a key area, is to get people introduced, women introduced to aviation, particularly at a young age. So over half of women surveyed, for example, in aviation said that one of the major influencing factors for them choosing aviation was getting introduced to it as a young girl or a young woman. So it's essential. Workforce development grants give us the opportunity to do that, and they also give us the opportunity to not have to reinvent the wheel. So there are some really great programs that we have for outreach for youth. Everything from, I'm AWAM, but Girls in Aviation Day and Organization Black Aerospace Professionals with Girls Launch, Young Eagles, of course, EA, but there's lots of programs that are out there for aviation outreach. And one of the things that the development grants allow us to do is to capitalize on what already exists, expand it, deepen it, broaden it, and really have the opportunity to recruit and retain more women into aviation.
Thank you. Captain Ambrosi, can you give us ALPA's view on this, on the return on investment in Congress? I'm afraid that we are sending a message that aviation workforce development is a low priority when most applicants don't receive the requested funding. Can you speak a little bit about what you think the return on investment would be if we drastically scaled up aviation workforce development grant funding from the $10 million a year it is right now to better approach the scale of need, which seems closer to $100 million a year?
Absolutely. Thank you for your question. First, let me thank you for your opening comments on preventing special interests from rolling back safety regulations. But on this topic, ALPA absolutely supports in increasing funding to get women and underrepresented groups involved in aviation. This is a great profession. It's something to be proud of. We need to reach out to these folks. I have an 8-year-old daughter that I hope has an easier ability to get into this business than females in my generation did, over 30 years ago when I started in this process. So absolutely, ALPA does outreach. We go to everything from elementary schools. We've done over 2,000 visits from elementary schools up to higher education. So we absolutely support and believe there is an excellent return on investment.
Thank you. Dr. Utash, I understand you sought one of these grants and did not receive it, and that is unfortunately a common experience. Can you speak a little bit about the need to increase the grant program?
Certainly, thank you. We have applied the last 2 rounds, and we have not received it. But I also have reviewed the proposals of those that received, which absolutely are great workforce programs. But I also perused all of the ones that did not receive funding, and so we would absolutely support the additional funding. There wasn't a proposal in that group that did not have a good return on investment, in my personal opinion. In ours, what we were trying to do was with the recent changes in the FAA regulations for the maintenance program, was to be able to take the general part of aviation across the state of Kansas to all of our high schools. That's a broad reach and a large net that can be cast. And every single one of those proposals that I perused and looked at, I thought had a great return on investment. So we would highly encourage from education that funding be expanded.